This episode of the Saturday Seance includes depictions of suicide, gun violence, wartime imagery, gambling, alcohol use, mental health disorders, and xenophobia. Viewer discretion and listener discretion for this episode are advised. The source for the first short story, Russian Roulette by Georges Surdez, is the January 30th, 1937 edition of Collier's Magazine, provided by WordPress. Collier's Magazine, based in New York City, ran stories of general interest from the years of 1888 to 1957. For our second story of the night, LiveJournal contributor Kitty Levin shares a translation of The Fatalist by Mikhail Lermontov, translated by George Wilson and Grace Mitchell. This post was contributed on October 18th, 2017, but the story is originally from the 1840 novel A Hero of Our Time by Russian writer and poet Mikhail Lermontov. Links to these sources will be provided in the chat if you would like to read along, and I will also add these links to the descriptions of my videos once posted to Twitch and YouTube. Hello, frequency finders, and welcome to the Saturday Seance. I'm Lux, your storyteller, host, guide, or whatever you'd like to call me, and I have a somewhat lengthy but hopefully spooky podcast or storytelling session planned for tonight, so hopefully you can stick with me. Our theme tonight is Russian Roulette. So our first short story of the tonight, which I've already talked a little bit about in the sources section, is Russian Roulette by Georges Surdez. This is the first known story where the term Russian roulette was first used. After this story debuted in Collier's Magazine in 1937, the first known reports of people playing and dying from games of Russian roulette actually became widespread. This largely attributed the game's popularity with the name attached to this original short story. So that meant that before this short story came out, there were no official reports that we know of deaths related to Russian roulette. In fact, many people doubt that the game Russian roulette actually existed or that anyone had knowingly died from it until after the short story became popular and potentially inspired the new trend of playing Russian roulette and new myths behind it. Our second short story of the night is The Fatalist by Mikhail Lermontov. It's an excerpt from his longer 1840 novel, A Hero of Our Time. This is the first known work where a game resembling Russian roulette, but not named specifically as Russian roulette, is described by the writer. This story suggests that there may be more to the supposed myth behind Russian roulette, and that there may have been similar lethal games of chance played by soldiers in wartime. So, without further ado, let's get started with our first story. So, our first story is Russian Roulette by Georges Surdez. Lieutenant. An official request for further explanations concerning the death by suicide of Sergeant Burkowski last month has arrived from the regimental headquarters in Meknes. Before making another report of the affair, I believe it is better to inform you of the circumstances so that you may advise me about what to say and what not. In my 9 years in the Foreign Legion, this exact situation never came up before. I may seem to criticize a man who is not only a dead man, but who is also my superior in rank. The lieutenant has known me for some years and cannot misunderstand my honest intentions. A few months ago, I was sent here to Boucous blockhouse to replace the second in command, invalided to Algeria at his own request. I liked Sergeant Chief Bukowski from the start. There never was a quarrel between us, no bad words exchanged, unless you count the times that he would say, "Feldheim, you thick-skulled German." And if there were no inferiors about over here, I would say something about crazy Russians. I'm aware, of course, that personalities and nationalities are against regulations in the Legion, but the lieutenant knows how such things go. Sergeant Burkowski, as you may know, talked like all Russians. That is, he was a bit boastful about what he had been, how much money he had had, the schools he had been to, and like all Russians, he thought he was a gambler. He would gamble or bet on anything, anytime, whether he had the money to pay or not. and he was very lucky. I do not gamble as a rule, but what with boredom here in the mountains, and the fact that he was my superior, from time to time I would risk small sums, which he invariably won. On anything, the number of nails missing in a legionnaire's boots, a date in history, how many shots would be fired by some sniper during the night. Those small sums, when added at the end of a month, amounted to more than you might think. One month, September, my entire pay went to Sergeant Burkowski. I decided to stop playing with him and told him so. He said that he was not surprised. The Germans were methodical, not speculative, and that this was both their strength to start with and their weakness at the end. I let that go. He was my superior. And he's dead, and cannot be brought to account. And as this is a private communication, Lieutenant, I may say that Sergeant Bukowski craved gambling so badly that he would gamble even with the Legionnaires. 4 different times I warned him it was not right for a sergeant to play cards or bet with corporals and privates. But he told me he knew more about communism than I would ever learn, and that discipline was not maintained by growls and kicks in the pants anywhere except in Germany. That is an exaggeration. I mean, I've known men who have served in Germany, in the German army, and they'd never been kicked. But I could not argue with him, a superior. Before long, nobody would gamble or bet with him, and he grew so nervous that it was pitiful. One night, after we had finished dinner, he takes out his revolver, a '92 model, and looks at me. "Feldheim," he says, "you ever hear of Russian roulette?" When I said I had not, he told me all about it. When he was with the Russian army in Romania, around 1917, and things were cracking up so that their officers felt that they were not only losing prestige, money, family, and country, but were also being dishonored before their colleagues of the Allied armies, some officer would suddenly pull out his revolver anywhere, at the table, in a cafe, at a gathering of friends, remove a cartridge from the cylinder, spin the cylinder, snap it back in place, put it to his head, and pull the trigger. There were 5 chances to 1 that the hammer would set off a live cartridge and blow his brains all over the place. Sometimes it happened. Sometimes not. When it did, there was nothing more to be said or done. When it didn't, the fellow waited another day. And as he explained, Burkowski removed a cartridge from the gun, spun the cylinder with his thumb, snapped it shut without looking at it. He said something about me never understanding the thrill of it, put the muzzle against his temple, and pressed the trigger. There was a click. He grinned, and seemed to feel better. At least 6 times during the winter, Lieutenant, he did the same thing. It made me very nervous, and I knew I would have to give explanations. A month ago, he gets a letter from England. He had had a sister who had married a wealthy Britisher long before the war. She had died, and he was inheriting part of her money. As nearly as we could figure, it was almost 1,000,000 francs. His enlistment had 6 months to run, then he would be free to spend the money. He had not seen his sister in 20 years, and did not feel badly on her account. I made a foolish remark of him having been so lucky not to have shot himself. That made him smile queerly. He told me that the money would soon be gone, and that stinking life would go on. He said, "Stinking life." And he told me he would give himself a chance to escape it. At this time, he took out 5 cartridges and left 1, reversing the order of chances. And he spun the cylinder under the table, snapped it shut. I tried to argue with him, and he laughed at me. "Listen," I started to tell him, "you'll lose this time, and I'll explain why." "Are you sure?" he asked. "No, but I have a theory as to why." I wanted to go on. "You Germans and your theories," he said. "I'll bet you 1,000 francs you're wrong, and that I won't kill myself." I wanted to explain what I meant, but he stopped me. "Back your opinion with money, or keep quiet." And he laid a 1,000-franc note on the table. I signed him a paper for that much, to be collected in 2 installments a month apart. Now, what's your theory? I told him when he spun the cylinder, he always used the same gesture of the thumb, probably haunting the rotation with an unconscious gesture at a given point, and that his movement of the cylinder, always starting from one chamber, brought that chamber in line with the hammer and barrel after a revolution and a half. That seemed to puzzle him. Then he understood. So I suggested that we call the bet off. But he grew quite angry and insisted on doubling the stakes. He was sure I had been wrong. He said, because if I were right, it meant that he had been cheating fate unintentionally. In any case, he continued, the movement could not possibly be the same with 5 empty chambers as with 5 full chambers. The weight would cause an alteration. I told him the change in weight would be too slight to make any difference, and he made another bet on that. I said to look at the gun and see, but he kept it hidden and shoved his money out. By that time I was very angry at his foolishness and had forgotten, almost, that it meant his life. The equivalent of 3 months' pay was there on the table, signed away if he ever lived, after pressing the trigger. It was a very nasty moment, Lieutenant, when I did not know what to hope for. He brought the gun up. With a quick movement, put the muzzle against his temple. There was a click. He had won again. We had a couple drinks together after that. I felt pretty low because he had tricked me again into betting. And even though I was glad he was alive, I couldn't forget I was a fool. We separated, and I took up my turn of guard while he went to bed. Much later, he comes in and hands me my signed slips and his money. He told me that his conscience bothered him, and that he had cheated. For as I was talking, he had slowly turned the cylinder under the table, changing the position of the chambers. And he himself did not know whether I had been right or wrong, because he could not remember in which direction he had turned. I believed him. And I believe him now. Burkowski was ashamed. He mumbled a lot about having been a gentleman. I told him not to be crazy, to forget it. And he was after me for 2 hours, trying to get me to try the bet all over again. But I was not to be caught a second time. I refused. He went away again, and not long after I heard the shot that killed him. I wondered whether he had tried the bet all over again privately. But when I examined the weapon, I discovered that all the chambers had been loaded. I hope the lieutenant can tell me how to arrange the story so that it may satisfy the authorities. It is not quite clear to me whether it would be right to reveal that he had shot himself for cheating. On the other hand, have I the right to falsify an official report? Respectfully yours, Hugo Feldheim, Sergeant, 3rd Foreign Infantry. That was our first story, Russian Roulette, by Georges Sudez. Our second story of the night is the earliest known story to mention a game similar to Russian Roulette, without naming the game explicitly as Russian Roulette. This is possibly the best known story attributed to the game, and the story is a little longer than the last, so get comfortable, grab a drink, grab a snack, and settle in for this one. So this is The Fatalist, but we're going to get started with an introduction. So Kitty Levin, the person who posted this on LiveJournal, provided an introduction herself about this specific translation, and I'm going to read that to you now. After my grandfather passed away, I was given his old copy of Mikhail Lermontov's novel, A Hero of Our Time. The novel has an interesting format. It is the story of one character, Grigory Pikchorin, told through an assortment of more or less self-contained chapters from the point of view of different narrators. There's an old Cossack who knew Pechorin, Maxim Maximich, a young man traveling alongside Maxim Maximich now, and Pechorin himself, speaking through his diary, which the young man finds after Pechorin's death. It is this fellow who dubs Pechorin a hero of our time. But the title is not an honor, as one might expect. The time referred to is a difficult one, a listless and doubtful one. After the War of 1812 and the Decembrist Rebellion, when the politically active and well-educated population of Russia, which not long ago had been bursting with patriotism and revolutionary spirit, lost sight of its goals, Pechorin, an educated military man, capable of being both charming and boorish, bored and disgusted with life and its meaninglessness, constantly seeking something new to entertain himself, and caring little for others' feelings in the process, expresses the mood of this period. The operative part of this book's title is not hero, but of our time. Pechorin is both a product and symbol of the era in which he lives. As I read through the yellow-brown pages of Grandpa's old book, purchased no doubt during his 1959 visit to the Soviet Union, I saw a bit of myself in Pechorin. This was Grandpa's favorite book. I wonder if he, in his youth, in the 50s and 60s, the post-war generation, did too. Inside the old book was another set of yellowed papers, covered with Grandpa's handwriting. This turned out to be a translation of the final chapter of the book, part of Pechorin's diary, titled The Fatalist. My grandpa studied Russian, then Japanese, and traveled all over the world. He eventually became a professor of Japanese history. I know I take after him, so I figured the least I could do was finish the translation, which covered about 2/3 of the chapter. I also edited Grandpa's portion to fix some inaccuracies, especially in the colloquial dialectical language spoken by some of the Cossacks, and change some of the wording that sounded outdated or awkward. But I tried to save as much of it as possible, and to imitate the style in my portion. I'm not sure if the end product is good, exactly, because I've been looking at it too long, but I enjoyed working on it, and I think Grandpa did too. So, without further ado, I present to you the final chapter of A Hero of Our Time. The Fatalist, the English translation by Mikhail Lermontov, translated by George Wilson and Grace Mitchell. Somehow, I happened once to stay for 2 weeks in a Cossack town on the left flank. A battalion of infantry was there too. The officers got together at each other's places in turn, and in the evenings played cards. Once, having tired of Boston and thrown the cards under the table, we stayed a very long time at Major S's. The conversation, contrary to the usual, was animated. We were talking about how the Moslem superstition that man's destiny is written in the stars has many admirers, even among ourselves. Each man told of various extraordinary happenings, pro and con. "All that, gentlemen, proves nothing," said the old major. "Why, none of you witnessed these strange happenings you used to confirm your views, did you?" "Of course none of us," said many. "But we heard from trustworthy people." "That's all nonsense," someone said. "Where are these trustworthy people who have seen the list that determines the hour of our death? And if there really is predestination, why were we given will and reason? Why are we held accountable for our behavior?" At this time, one officer, who had been sitting in a corner of the room, got up and, slowly walking to the table, cast a calm and sullen gaze over everyone. He was a Serb, as was apparent from his name. Lieutenant Vulich's outward appearance fully reflected his character. His height and dark complexion, his black hair, black penetrating eyes, his large but regular nose, an attribute of his nation, and the sad, cold smile which always roved over his lips. All this seemed to come together to give him the appearance of a special creature incapable of communicating his thoughts and passions with those whom fate had made his comrades. He was brave, spoke little but cuttingly. He confided the secrets of his soul and family to no one. He almost never drank wine, and he never ran after young Cossack girls, whose charm is hard to express to those who haven't seen them. They say, however, that the colonel's wife was attracted to his expressive eyes, but he got genuinely angry when anyone hinted at this. There was only one passion that he did not hide, a passion for gambling. At the green table, he forgot everything and usually lost, but continuous failures only aroused his obstinacy. They say that once, at night, During an expedition, he set up the bank on a pillow. He was awfully lucky. Suddenly, shots rang out. Somebody hit the alarm, and everyone jumped up and rushed for the weapons. "Stake everything," yelled Vulich, not rising, to one of the hottest punters. "I'm on 7," answered the other, running off. Despite the general furor, Vulich dealt the next pair. The 7 was the winning card. When he appeared at the front, there was a strong crossfire. Vulich did not worry about the Chechen bullets or swords. He was looking for his lucky punter. "The 7 is dealt," he shouted, after catching sight of him in a line of riflemen, who had begun to oust hostile forces from the woods. Going closer, he took out his coin purse and wallet and gave them to the lucky fellow, in spite of his objection to the irrelevance of paying now. After fulfilling that unpleasant duty, Vulich hurled himself forward, drawing the soldiers behind him, and coolly exchanged fire with the Chechens to the very end of the thing. When Lieutenant Vulich approached the table, everyone shut up, expecting some original trick from him. "Gentlemen," he said in his voice. His voice was calm, although lower than usual. "Gentlemen, why are these empty quarrels? You want proof? I suggest you test on yourselves whether a person can voluntarily arrange his life, or whether the fateful moment for each of us is determined in advance. Who's willing?" "No, not I," was heard from all sides. "He's nuts! Such things cross his mind." "I propose a bet," said I for fun. "What kind?" "I say there's no predestination," I said, emptying about 20 gold pieces onto the table, all I had in my pocket. "I'll take it," answered Vulich in a hollow voice. "Major, you be the judge. Here are 15 gold pieces. You owe me the other 5, so do me the kindness to add them to these." "All right," said the major. "Only I don't understand, really. What's going on? How will you settle the wager?" Vulich quietly went out to the major's bedroom. We followed him. He went up to the wall, where the weapons were hanging, and at random, he took one of the various caliber pistols from its nail. We still did not understand him, but when he cocked the pistol and poured powder on the shelf, many cried out involuntarily and grabbed his arms. "What are you trying to do? Listen, it's madness!" they yelled at him. "Gentlemen," he said, slowly freeing his arms, "who will pay 20 gold pieces for me?" Everyone hushed and stepped away. Vulich went into the other room and sat at the table. Everyone followed him. With a sign, he invited us to sit in a circle. Without a word, we obeyed him. In that moment, he acquired a certain mysterious power over us. I stared into his eyes, but he met my searching look with a calm and immobile gaze, and his pale lips smiled. Yet, in spite of his coolness, it seemed to me that I read the stamp of death on his pale face. I had observed, and many old soldiers had confirmed my observation, that there is often some strange mask of an inevitable fate on the face of a man who is to die, such that it is hard for the practiced eye to be mistaken. "You're going to die soon," I said to him. "Maybe so, but maybe not." Then, turning to the major, he asked, "Is the pistol loaded?" The major didn't remember exactly in his confusion. "Yes, enough, Vulich," someone shouted. "You bet it's loaded. If it was hanging all by the bedhead, what a joke you're playing." "A stupid joke," another one chimed in. "I have 50 rubles against 5 that the pistol is not loaded," shouted a third. New bets were being placed. This long ceremony bored me. "Listen," I said, "either shoot yourself or put the pistol back where it was and let's go to sleep." "Definitely," cried many. "Let's go to bed." "Gentlemen, I ask you not to move from your places," said Vulich, putting the muzzle of the pistol to his forehead. Everyone seemed petrified. "Mr. Pechorin," he added, "take a card and throw it up." I took from the table, as I remember it now, the ace of hearts, and threw it upwards. Everybody stopped breathing, all eyes, full of fear, and some undefined curiosity, ran from the pistol to the fatal ace, which was slowly falling, tumbling in the air. At the moment it touched the table, Vulich pulled the trigger. A misfire. "Thank God," cried many, "it wasn't loaded." "Take a look," said Vulich. He cocked the pistol again and aimed it at the service cap hanging over the window. A shot rang out. Bang! Smoke filled the room. The cap was pierced right through the middle, and the bullet had lodged deep in the wall. 3 minutes, and no one could utter a word. Bullich very calmly transferred my gold pieces into his coin purse. There was talk about why the pistol did not go off the first time. Some attested that probably the shelf had been choked up. Others said that at first the powder had been damp, and that afterwards Bullich had put in fresh. But I maintained that the latter assumption was not correct, because I had not taken my eyes from the pistol the whole time. "You're lucky at gambling," I said to Bullich. "For the first time in my life," he answered, smiling satisfiedly. "That was better than banking faro." "But a little more dangerous." "And now, are you beginning to believe in predestination?" "I believe, only I don't understand why it seemed to me that you surely had to die today." The same person who had such a short while ago calmly aimed at his own forehead was now suddenly flushed and embarrassed. "But that's enough," he said, getting up. "Our bet is done, and now your remarks, it seems to me, are out of place." He took his cap and left. This struck me as strange, and not without reason. Soon everybody dispersed to their houses, gabbling about Bullich's eccentricities, and probably unanimously calling me an egoist because I bet against a man who wanted to shoot himself. As if he could not find a convenient opportunity without me. I returned home through the empty alleys of the town, the moon full and red as the glow of a fire began to rise from the jagged horizon of the houses. The stars shone calmly on the deep blue firmament, and I found it funny when I remembered that in the old days there were wise men who believed that heavenly bodies participate in our miscellaneous quarrels over a piece of land or certain imagined rights. And what of it? Those lamps, which they thought were lit to only illuminate their battles and triumphs, burn with their former luster, but their own passions and hopes went out long ago, along with them, like a tiny flame lit at the edge of a wood by a careless wanderer. Still, confidence that the whole sky, with its innumerable inhabitants, looked on them with concern, mute perhaps, but unfaltering, gave them such a strength of will. And we, their poor descendants, wandering over the earth without conviction or pride, without amusement or anxiety, except for that involuntary fear that presses the heart at the thought of our inevitable end. We are no longer capable of sacrifices for the good of mankind or even for our own personal happiness, because we know its impossibility and languidly go from doubt to doubt as our predecessors threw themselves from one delusion to another, not possessing, as they did, either hope or even the undefined but great pleasure which greets the soul in every struggle with men or fate. And many similar thoughts passed through my mind. I did not hold them back, because I do not like to dwell on any abstract idea. What would that lead to? In my earliest youth, I was a dreamer. I loved to embrace now gloomy, now rosy images, drawn before me by restless and greedy imagination. But what of that is left to me? Fatigue alone, like after a nighttime battle with phantasms and confused recollections full of suffering. In this vain struggle, I exhausted both the ardor of my soul and the constancy of will necessary for a full life. I entered this life having already lived through it mentally, and I found it boring and nasty, like reading a bad imitation of a book one has long known and loved. The events of the evening produced a rather deep impression on me and irritated my nerves. I do not know for sure whether I believe in predetermination now or not. But that evening I firmly believed the evidence was striking, and I, in spite of the fact that I laughed at our predecessors and their helpful astrology, fell unwittingly into their rut. That I stopped myself in time on this dangerous path, and in keeping with my rule of not rejecting anything decisively, and not believing anything blindly, threw metaphysics out, and began to look beneath my feet. Such a precaution was very apropos. I nearly fell when I stumbled on something thick and soft, but apparently no longer alive. I bent down, The moon still shone right on the road. And what was it? Before me lay a pig, sliced in two by a sword. Just as I succeeded in making it out, I heard the sound of footsteps. 2 Cossacks ran from an alley. One approached me and asked whether I had not seen the drunken Cossack who had been running after the pig. I explained to him that I had not met this Cossack, and pointed to the unlucky victim of his violent courage. "What a bandit," said the second Cossack. "Gets drunk on muddy wine, and then goes off to shred everything that comes his way. Let's go after him, Yeremich. We'll have to tie him up or else." They moved on, while I continued on my way with great care, and at last got home successfully. I lived at the home of an old Cossack sergeant, whom I loved for his good disposition, and all the more for his pretty daughter, Nastya. As usual, she was waiting for me at the gate, wrapped in a fur coat. The moon lighted her sweet lips, grown blue from the cold of night. When she recognized me, she smiled, but I paid her no heed. "So long, Nastya," I said, walking past. She wanted to reply somehow, but I only sighed. I shut the door of my room behind me, lit a candle, and threw myself on the bed, but this time sleep forced me to wait longer than usual. The east was already brightening when I fell asleep, but clearly it was written in the stars that I should not rest well this night. At 4 a.m, 2 fists banged on my window. I leapt up. "What on earth?" "Get up and get dressed," voices yelled at me. I hurriedly dressed and went out. "Do you know what happened?" The 3 officers who had come for me said in unison. They were pale as death. "What?" "Vulich is dead." I froze. "Yes, dead," they continued. "Come quickly." "But where?" "You'll figure it out on the way." We set off. They told me everything that happened, throwing in various observations about the strange predestination that had saved him from inevitable death half an hour before his death. Vulich had been walking alone on a dark street. The drunk Cossack who had cut down the pig came rushing toward him, and might have gone past without noticing him, had Vulich not suddenly stopped and said, "Who are you after, brother?" "You," the Cossack replied, striking him with his sword, and then slashed him from shoulder to almost the heart. The 2 Cossacks I had met following the killer caught up to him and lifted the wounded man, but he was already breathing in his last, and said only 2 words. "He's right." Only I understood the dark meaning of those words. They referred to me. I unwittingly predicted the poor man's fate. My instinct did not betray me. I precisely read, on his altered face, the stamp of the approaching end. The killer had locked himself away. In an empty house, at the end of the town. We were on our way there. A multitude of crying women were running the same way. Occasionally a tardy Cossack clattered out onto the street, rushing to fasten a knife to his belt, and outpaced us at a run. The fury was frightening. And finally we arrived, and looked around. A crowd surrounded the house, the doors and windows of which were locked from the inside. Officers and Cossacks were talking heatedly among themselves. Women were wailing, cursing and lamenting. Among them stood out to me the solemn face of an old woman with an expression of a mad desperation. She sat on a thick log, resting her elbows on her knees, with her head in her hands. This was the killer's mother. Her lips occasionally quivered, where they were whispering a prayer, or a curse. In any case, we had to decide on something and seize the criminal. However, no one took it upon himself to go in first. I went to the window and looked through the crack in the shutters. Pale, he lay on the floor, holding a pistol in his right hand. His bloodied sword lay nearby. His expressive eyes spun frightfully in circles. At times, he shuddered and clutched his head, as though hazily recalling the day before. I did not see much strength of will in his restless gaze, and told the major that it was no use stopping the Cossacks from breaking the door down and rushing him, because that would be better to do now than later, when he fully came to himself. At that moment, an old Cossack captain approached the door, and addressed the criminal by name. He responded. "Yefimich, brother, you have sinned," said the captain. "There's nothing for it. Give in." "I won't," the Cossack answered. "Have the fear of God, you're no damned Chechen. You're an honest Christian. Well, and sin's got you mixed up already, so there's nothing left. You can't escape your fate." I won't give in, the Cossack cried menacingly, and the sound of the pistol being cocked reached our ears. Hey, Auntie, the captain said to the old lady. Talk to your son. God willing he'll listen to you. See, this is just asking for God's wrath. And look, these gentlemen have been waiting 2 hours already. The old woman looked at him firmly and shook her head. Vasily Petrovich, the captain said, approaching the major. He won't give in. I know him, and if we break the door, he'll do a lot of us in. Do you think maybe we'd better shoot him now? Those shutters have wide gaps. Just then a strange thought flitted through my head. Like foliage, I decided to test my fate. Hold on, I said to the major. I'll take him alive. Having told the captain to start a conversation with him, and placed 3 Cossacks by the door to beat it down and run to my aid at a certain signal, I went around the house and approached the fateful window. My heart beat wildly. Oh, you devil, cried the captain. Are you making fun of us or what? Or you think we're no match for you? He started to hammer at the door with all his might. I pressed my eye to the gap in the shutters, following the movements of the Cossack, who was not expecting an attack from this side, and all at once tore off the shutters and threw myself headfirst through the window. A shot rang out by my ear, and the bullet tore off my epaulette. But the smoke that filled the room hindered my enemy's search for the sword that lay beside him. I grabbed him by the arms, the Cossacks burst in, and before 3 minutes had passed, the criminal was tied up and escorted away. The crowd dispersed, and officers congratulated me, with good reason. After all, it seems, how could one not become a fatalist? But who really knows whether he's sure of something or not? And how often we mistake the deception of our emotions or errors of logic for sure facts. I love to doubt everything. Such a position doesn't weaken the resolve of one's character. On the contrary, in my case, I always go forward, more surely when I don't know what lies in store for me, because death is the worst that can happen, and death can't be avoided. Returning to the fortress, I told Maxim Maximich everything that happened to me and everything I saw, and asked for his opinion on predestination. At first, he didn't understand the meaning of the word, but I explained it as best as I could. Then he said, solemnly, shaking his head, Yes, sir, of course, sir. That's a real tricky thing. But anyhow, those Asian hammers often misfire if they're oiled wrong or you don't squeeze the trigger just hard enough. I'll admit, I don't like Circassian rifles either. They're not quite right for our guys, but the butt's too small. Look out or you'll burn your nose off. But those swords they've got, now those have my respect. Later, having thought a little, he murmured, Pity the poor man. Devil made him talk to a drunk that night. But of course, it must have been fated for him from birth. I couldn't get anything else out of him. He can't stand metaphysical debates. That's the end. So, thank you for joining me for tonight's stories. I hope you enjoyed these readings of Russian Roulette by Georges Surdez and The Fatalist by Mikhail Lermontov. Please join me every other Saturday for a new episode of the Saturday Seance, where I share stories and myths that delve into the strange, spooky, and macabre. See you next session.